Hello and welcome. I'm Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. Now, in that vein, showing my reaction to all the news that's associated with UAP and UFO, I have to admit that even I get confused sometimes because there's so many stories, so many reports out there, a lot of it contradictory, a lot of different narratives. So I've decided to dedicate some time to going over events in the ufology, UFO, UAP history. And I'm going to be showing the mainstream UFO, UAP history that the government and that most people know about and that the government wants you to know about, or that is common knowledge. And I'm also going to go into the behind the scenes UFO, UAP history, showing you what maybe some of you may not know, what may not be common knowledge, but might explain a lot of what's going on and may fill in a lot of the blanks for a lot of you guys. So hopefully I'll be filling in or connecting the dots for a lot of my viewers. Stay tuned. It should be very interesting. So I'd like to start out with a sanitized version of UFO history, the sort of thing that the government has allowed to get out and most of us are aware of. It's common knowledge and it's in the mainstream. And it's stuff that goes way back in history because UFOs aren't just a modern phenomenon. If we look back through history, we find that people have reported seeing unidentified flying objects since ancient times. If we look back in classical Greece and Rome, for example, the philosopher Plutarch wrote about flaming spears and shields that moved in formation in the heavens. The historian Livy told of a phantom navy seen shining in the sky. And the writer Jules Obsequens told of golden spheres of fire that flew through the air. It's only far more recently, however, that the idea of UFOs or UAPs as an indication of extraterrestrial life has become established in the wider public, believe it or not. Scientifically and statistically speaking, there's a rational argument to be made for the existence of intelligent species in the universe apart from ourselves. The scientist Enrico Fermi posited in his famous Fermi paradox, if there are other civilizations spread throughout the galaxy, then why haven't we heard of them? Scientists continue to tackle that question today with theories such as the Great Filter, that aliens have existed, but they were wiped out, and also the zoo hypotheses, for example, that extraterrestrial life exists, but they're choosing not to contact Earth. Then there are ufologists who argue that aliens are already here. Modern UAP history, though, is full of a lot of tantalizing details that have convinced many people to believe that actual UFOs have visited Earth and continue to do so. According to recent polling, 42% of Americans believe in UAPs, and most of these Americans believe that unidentified flying objects are alien spacecraft visiting Earth from other planets or galaxies. I'm going to show some of the most pivotal events in the history of UAP, events that have helped convince many people that aliens are indeed among us. And these are widely accepted reports. Let's start right at the beginning of mainstream knowledge of how ufology actually began in the United States. And let's start with Kenneth Arnold. On June the 24th, 1947, a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold was flying close to Mount Rainier in Washington state when he saw 9 shiny circular objects flying in formation, like the one that you see on the screen now if you have a visual on this. They were about 100 feet across, and each one flew at what he estimated as about 1,200 miles per hour. That's roughly twice as fast as any aircraft at that time. The report was soon picked up by the Associated Press, which described Arnold's strange sightings of, quote, 9 bright saucer-like objects, end quote. Then the story then exploded across the United States with the new term flying saucers on everyone's lips. And that's how it is believed that ufology or UFO sightings began. Then there was the Roswell incident. 10 days before Kenneth Arnold saw his flying saucers, a ranch named W. Mac Brazel and his son were driving across their ranch land about 80 miles northwest of Roswell, New Mexico. They came across a patch of land in the desert strewn with rubber strips and metallic-looking lightweight fabric. Baffled, they returned home. It wasn't until weeks later, on July the 4th, that they returned to collect the debris, unaware of the nationwide flying saucer fervor that had recently begun, which they then delivered to the local sheriff. From there, things escalated quickly, and the case passed up through the military ranks until it reached the commander of the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth, Texas. Then the Air Force made a curious decision. They released an extraordinary press release stating that they had recovered, quote, a flying disc, end quote. Naturally, the story spread like wildfire, and the Air Force soon tried to backtrack, stating that it was actually a weather balloon carrying a radar target, but the damage had been done. And we know from Phil Corso and his book, The Day After Roswell, that the military actually retrieved the craft and was able to back engineer a lot of the components in that craft and come up with a lot of the technology that we have today, or so they say. Following Kenneth Arnold's flying saucer sighting, the Roswell incident, and the general furor surrounding UFOs that began in the late 1940s, the United States Air Force launched a systematic investigation into unidentified flying objects. Known as Project Blue Book, it was the first large-scale government investigation into UFOs formed in 1952. The project investigated 12,618 reported sightings that occurred between 1947 and the project's termination in 1969. Most of the cases were found to be caused by weather balloons, swamp gases, of all things, meteorological events, or temperature inversions. But more than 700 Project Blue Book entries could not be explained by investigators. And I guess that was the precursor to what today we have AARO, or the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. It was just more secretive and undisclosed and behind the scenes back then. Now, I'd like to move on to abductions and where the whole abduction phenomenon started, according to mainstream ufology, that is. On a September night in 1969, Betty and Barney Hill were driving along an empty country road in New Hampshire's White Mountains. All was normal, apart from a strange light in the sky that appeared to be following them. Then they stopped. The light, which Betty described as a spinning disc, came closer until it was right above them. They drove off in a panic, dazed and groggy from the experience, and when they arrived home, they realized that the journey had taken 2 hours longer than it should have. They finally talked publicly about the incident. As media interest grew, the Hills underwent hypnosis, revealing further details about their supposed abduction. For example, they talked about a flying disc, gray beings, and bodily probing. This story was turned into a best-selling book and later a movie called The Interrupted Journey and the UFO Incident, respectively. This helped establish the incident as the archetypical abduction case. Then in 1980, United States Air Force personnel stationed at RAF Woodridge in Suffolk, England, saw a series of strange lights in the nearby Rendlesham Forest. The first sightings occurred on the night of December the 26th, when Air Force security guards went to investigate. They saw what one of them described as a red, oval, sun-like object in a clearing of the woods, which then lifted up through the trees and shot back toward the coast. Over the next couple of days, servicemen went back into the forest to investigate further. Then, in the early hours of December the 28th, things got even stranger. The deputy base commander described how a flashing light seemed to descend upon him and his colleagues, and how three bright objects hovered just above the horizon, occasionally emitting streams of light down to the ground. The Rendlesham Forest incident is often referred to as Britain's Roswell, and it remains an extremely strange case and one of the most famous UAP sightings in history. More recently, in 2020, the Pentagon officially released 3 short UFO videos shot from U.S. Navy fighter jets showing, quote, unidentified aerial phenomenon, end quote, or UAP, which is how they're being referred to now by the government. UAP is the government's preferred term for UFOs. The videos had been released previously by a private company, but this was the first time the Pentagon officially acknowledged their existence. Naturally, these videos garnered a great deal of media and public attention, which in turn prompted the Pentagon to take the whole UFO-UAP situation more seriously. For the first time since Project Blue Book, a major investigation was launched, culminating in the unclassified annual report on unidentified aerial phenomena. And in this report, it was covered over 510 cataloged UAP sightings from branches of the United States military. And of those, over 171 remained uncharacterized and unattributed, as they termed it, with some described as demonstrating, quote, unusual flight characteristics or performing capabilities. More recently, though, the AARO annual report reported that they have no evidence of the existence of any UAP or any reverse engineering that has taken place. So it's certainly an intriguing turn of events. And people are once again looking to the skies in search of UFOs, if only the government would cooperate just a little bit more. So I would like to now present a historic overview of UAP-related events, whistleblowers, and witnesses supporting the view that retrieved alien spacecraft have been successfully reverse engineered for decades by different governments, starting with Germany in the run-up to World War II. This view is contrary to recent claims made by several prominent whistleblowers and scientists that retrieved alien spacecraft have not been reverse engineered due to their complexity and difficulty of understanding the advanced science and materials behind them. Pentagon's new UFO office, or AARO, says that they have no evidence of any extraterrestrial or extraordinary objects. And this is a still from footage shot by United States MQ-9 Reaper drone showing what appears to be an unidentified spherical object soaring through the air. Seems a bit contradictory. Okay, so here's David Grush talking to Ross Coulthart about a crash retrieval that happened even before Roswell back in 1933. And this is contrary to AARO's recent claim that there is no evidence of any crash retrieval programs or any back engineering UAP from said crashes.
You say it's a 90-year cover-up.
Just about, yeah.
90 years?
1933 was the first recovery in Europe, in Magenta, Italy. They recovered a partially intact vehicle.
It's true. It's real.
Yeah, that actually happened. The Italian government moved it to a secure air base in Italy for the rest of kind of the fascist regime until 1944, 1945, and the Pope Pius XII back-channeled that.
So the Vatican was involved?
Yeah, and told the Americans what the Italians had, and we ended up scooping it.
So let me be very clear about this. You're saying that the Catholic Church, the Vatican, they know about the existence of non-human intelligence on this planet?
Certainly.
It didn't start or end with Roswell. The first traceable recovery of a UFO occurred 14 years before the infamous cover-up in the desert sands of Nevada. In fact, in direct statements made by both David Grush and Lou Elizondo, the first NHI craft to be forcibly taken by U.S. forces would arise from the smoldering remains of the Italian fascist state, led by none other than Benito Mussolini.
Okay, so I know that David Grush says that we scooped up that UAP from Mussolini back in 1944, 1945, but there's a possibility that Hitler might have gotten his hands on that UAP when he was allied with Mussolini. There's also a conspiracy theory that back in 1919, technology instructions for the creation of a circular flying machine was being received by Maria Orsic via telepathic messages from an extraterrestrial civilization existing in the Aldebaran solar system, which Dr. W.O. Schumann found viable physics for development. So if they didn't get a craft from Mussolini, it possibly might have actually been built with Maria Orsic's instructions by Dr. Schumann. And that's one conspiracy theory anyway. And the reason why I think that Hitler might have gotten his UAP from Mussolini is because the very next year, in 1934, the SS developed an operational anti-gravity craft. So could Mussolini's UAP have been confiscated by Hitler? And who knows? There is a conspiracy theory that the Nazis developed an operational anti-gravity craft 20 years ahead of the USS because they had help from the Draco extraterrestrials of the Siakar Empire. Might explain why Professor Hermann Oberth is famous for saying, quote, "We had help from the people of other worlds." Then in 1939, a U.S. Navy spy reveals a Nazi space program to Navy Secretary James Forrestal, who commences a Navy spy program in Germany. In 1942, secret Nazi SS documents were gathered by Vladimir Terzisky at the fall of the Soviet Union that showed that a number of anti-gravity craft designs by Nazi Germany had been developed. And here's a very hard to find video of old Russian forces retrieving a UFO craft. There's no sound to this, but this is definitely way before CGI. And you can see the craft in the woods there. And you can see that these are Russian soldiers. And just from the jeeps and the uniforms, you can see that this is from way back before the 1950s, probably 1930s. And see how careful they're being. So they seem to be clearing the area for removal. It's a smaller part of the craft, I guess. Seems to be embedded into the ground. That guy there with the briefcase is probably a politician, some higher up. He's probably an administrator with the SS. And you can tell it's a very remote area in Russia. Russia has so many remote areas, it's such a large country. And this was about the time in 1944 that the Nazis are said to escape to Antarctica. This is another conspiracy theory that's been out there for a long time. So I thought that I should include this in the behind the scenes history of UAP. The Nazis are said to have escaped to Antarctica and South America with over 100 U-boats, 250,000 Germans, and the Reich's top scientists were unaccounted for, some of which wound up here in the United States. They took with them their advanced anti-gravity craft from Germany to set up their secret space program. It's also believed by many conspiracy theorists that in 1946, the official history of World War II was rewritten in order to hide the Nazi escape and infiltration. And this was done by the Rockefeller Foundation, working in alliance with them, supposedly. Then in 1947, the famous Admiral Byrd's Operation High Jump is totally defeated by a Nazi craft in Antarctica. And that's one of the more famous UFO accounts, that his entire armada that went out there was defeated by UAPs. This supposedly occurred in 1947. It's also believed that Hollywood had a lot to do with shaping our mindset or our idea of what's going on with ufology and the whole idea that we're being visited by NHIs. In 1951, there was a Project Dove, which was a CIA Air Force psychological operation that was meant to influence the Hollywood movie industry and shape the public's imagination to turn their perception of extraterrestrials as being a negative thing. So a lot of the movies were about aliens invading Earth and trying to take over the planet. There's a conspiracy theory, and Dr. Stephen Greer has provided evidence of this, that in 1952, a secrecy act was enacted by order of national security to guard against any anti-gravity inventions. So a lot of scientists and inventors that did come up with anti-gravity devices, their patents were seized under the guise of it being a national security threat. And what it really was it was a threat to the economy. Also in 1952, we had the famous flyover Washington, D.C., and it is said by conspiracy theorists that these were Nazi anti-gravity craft that flew over Washington, D.C. in order to intimidate Truman and Eisenhower.
In Washington, D.C., several UFO over the White House were tracked by radar. It was noted that the speed of the UFO approached 7,000 miles per hour. Watch the video and tell me what you think.
In 1952, MJ-12 mounted a psychological operation and used George Adamski to divert public awareness from the Nazi craft or from any craft that anyone might see in the sky, and to have the public believe that they are our space brothers from Venus. So there's a conspiracy theory out there saying that George Adamski, even though his pictures look very authentic, was being used by intelligence to divert the public's attention away from what was really happening. So this is a video from the Adamski Foundation. It's a UAP decelerating that George Adamski was able to film. And as you all know, this was way before CGI.
Property. This craft is at regular speed moving by that house behind the power lines. It's a saucer-shaped craft with most of the propulsion system turned down low. Here is at half speed to give you a better idea of the view of this, the maneuverability. I had one astronaut in a MUFON lecture a couple months ago in Orange County ask me a question, a shuttle pilot, why do they move what we call erratically? And I mentioned to him the fact that aerodynamics doesn't apply to them the same way. This is a picture of a newer type of craft. The bell-shaped craft is a very old historical craft that they came with for reasons to remind us in our historical record. But this particular lenticular craft is capable of interplanetary travel without the carrier craft. This is taken in Wisconsin. And if this craft's maneuverability for both towards you and then moving backwards and then sideways, dipping, these type of films astounded the military. Still some of the best in civilian hands. Completely different place, completely different environment. This is half speed. These craft can range anywhere from the smallest of about 33 feet, the largest of the bell-shaped probably about 120 feet, the cigar-shaped craft from about 1,000 feet is their smallest to about 20 miles.
It's very old footage and definitely before CGI. The speaker made a point of saying that everything George Adamski was saying has come full circle and been verified. Okay, so here's more evidence to back up the conspiracy theory that a lot of the original UAPs were manned by Nazis. And this is these are incidents from 1956 through 1957, and they were of Nazi craft landing and being seen by the public. In 1956, January the 7th, Willard Wanal in Oahu sees a saucer craft land with a swastika and Nazi Iron Cross. He spoke with the pilot, who had a German accent and wore a Nazi uniform. In 1957, November the 5th, Reinhold O. Schmidt in Nebraska sees a craft land, and the occupants, he said, he could hear them talking among themselves in, quote, High German language, end quote. Okay, and this is a picture of Dr. Stephen Greer at a citizen hearing in 2013, where he famously said that since 1954, we have not needed rockets, jets, internal combustion engines, and surface roadways between cities. I say this with authority that this is the case, and that's a direct quote. So a whistleblower, Mark McCandish, testified in Dr. Greer's presentation that anti-gravity vehicles were built back in the 1950s. Here's a graphic of what they looked like, different size models. Conspiracy theorists that believe that Nazis are behind a lot of the UAPs that we see say that further evidence is shown with Dr. Kurt Debus being placed as a NASA director. And he was one of the, he was a former Nazi SS officer that was brought over in Project Paperclip. And in 1958, NASA is created and run by Dr. Kurt Debus, who was a former SS officer. And this is one way conspiracy theorists say that they're keeping us believing we need rockets to overcome gravity, when in fact we have anti-gravitic crafts already. So Nikola Tesla taught Otis Carr how to create an anti-gravity vehicle in 1937. By 1959, Otis Carr had created and patented his own OTC-X1 spacecraft. And here's a diagram of it. 2 weeks after the successful test of the OTC-X1, the FBI and other government agencies in a secret raid shut down Otis Carr's operation and confiscated everything. The FBI told Carr that his project was being closed because of your, quote, threat to overthrow the monetary system of the United States of America. Yeah, it would turn our economy on its head, but probably for the better eventually. At a graduation for UCL Beach, Ben Rich, who was head of the Lockheed Skunk Works, was quoted as saying, "We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do." End quote. That doesn't leave much to the imagination, what Ben Rich said. Back in 2001, Dr. Stephen Greer had his first National Press Club event in Washington, D.C., where he went before mainstream media and he addressed the illegal secret government operations of the extraterrestrial presence. He also exposed black projects. And most of us remember Gary McKinnon. He made national, if not worldwide, headlines, who was a UK computer hacker. And he revealed that the US Navy has a space program called the Solar Warden. And a lot of people within the UFO community know about the Admiral Wilson memo, but mainstream people probably don't know that in 2002, there was an Admiral Wilson memo transcribed by Dr. Eric Davis that revealed secret projects working on technology, quote unquote, not of this earth. The program manager said they didn't know where it was from. They had some idea on this. It was technology that was not of this earth, not made by man, not made by human hands. This is a 2006 anti-gravitic triangular spacecraft patent, and it proves that we have anti-gravitic craft. The triangular spacecraft patent is right there for us to see. So I found this right on X. That's how arrogant Lockheed Martin is. They're showing off a representation or an artist's impression of a craft of the future, which by all accounts in the conspiracy circles, they already have. And in 2018, the US Navy is granted a patent for an advanced anti-gravity aircraft design and acknowledges it being operable. So here are two whistleblowers on anti-gravitic technology and what happened to them. Both of these testimonies would have confirmed we have anti-gravitic technology. So on November the 11th, 2019, former USAF intelligence specialist Mike Turber claims the 2004 Nimitz anti-gravity Tic Tac belongs to the United States Air Force. April the 6th, 2021, Mike Turber completely retracts his earlier testimony. That's strange. Did someone pay both of these men a visit? Because in April the 13th, 1 week later, 2021, Disclosure Project witness Mark McCandish, whose testimony reveals we had anti-gravitic crafts built back in the 1950s, had planned on testifying at the June 2021 UFO UAP hearing. He was found dead from a gunshot to his head. In 2023, David Grush, a United States Air Force officer and former intelligence official, testified in a U.S. House of Representatives hearing. Grush claims the government maintains a UFO UAP recovery and reverse engineering program, and that it is in possession of, quote, non-human, end quote, spacecraft along with their, quote, dead pilots, end quote. Okay, so now I'd like to go into who has said that we do not have reverse engineer technology, or that have said that we have had trouble reverse engineering craft and have not been able to reverse engineer a UAP, whether knowingly or unknowingly. In 1993, S4 scientist Bob Lazar expressed that due to the highly compartmentalized security structure, they were unable to bring in more of the scientific community minds in the reverse engineering effort of the Zeta 2 reticuli spacecraft Lazar was working on in order to make significant progress. Now, I believe Bob Lazar. I think he's very credible, but as he said, everything was very compartmentalized in S4. So I think he's being honest in giving testimony as to what he saw. And what he saw was an attempt to back engineer a propulsion device, and it was unsuccessful. But he had very limited exposure to what was really going on. So you can't blame him. As honest as he is, he wasn't exposed to everything. As I mentioned before, Admiral Thomas Wilson and Dr. Eric Davis were part of that narrative. In 2002, in the leaked Admiral Wilson memo, the Admiral was told that reverse engineering of extraterrestrial craft was, quote, going on for years and years with very slow progress, agonizingly slow with little or no progress. In the New York Times, July 23, 2020, there was an interview of Dr. Eric Davis, who was an astrophysicist, and he gave Congress multiple classified briefings on, quote, off-world vehicles not made on this Earth. He spoke of the lack of success scientists had in reverse engineering the, quote, off-world vehicles due to difficulties in understanding the new physics operating in the recovered craft. It was his belief that the reverse engineering program suffered from a lack of funding. So he admits there, in his quote, that there are recovered craft, but he denies that we've been able to reverse engineer them or have had any success. I'd like to talk a little bit now about the threat narrative. It's one of the narratives that has been going around in the UFO community, that the aliens are a national threat. The government has been pushing this. So everyone remembers Orson Welles' radio broadcast, War of the Worlds, back in 1938. The Rockefeller Foundation supposedly funded a psychological study of public fear reaction to an alien invasion with a fake radio broadcast. Dr. Hadley Cantrill, who hired Orson Welles, afterward wrote a paper titled, quote, The Invasion from Mars, a Study in the Psychology of Panic, end quote, studying the effect on a population under the fear of an alien invasion. So that whole radio broadcast was all choreographed. And from what I've read, the panic was really overblown. It overall was not a panic. It was just a handful of people that might have panicked. But overall, most people realized that it was a radio broadcast and not real. Another individual that was pushing the threat narrative early on in 1955 was General MacArthur. And despite a top secret gag order, General Douglas MacArthur told the New York Times, quote, the nations of the world will have to unite, for the next war will be an interplanetary war. The nations of the earth must someday make a common front against attack by people from other planets. Sounds like he knew something. And of course, Who could forget President Ronald Reagan's United Nations speech back in 1987, where he famously said, quote, "Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to recognize this common bond." I occasionally think how quickly our differences would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world, end quote. And even back in 2014, President Bill Clinton on the Jimmy Kimmel Show spoke about aliens regarding the alien invasion. And he said, quote, "If we were visited someday, I wouldn't be surprised. I just hope it's not like Independence Day." Another narrative that has been circling around the UFO community is that of a false flag. And that's a military term for made-up invasion or a made-up threat in order to rile up or unite a certain group of people. There have been several indications that a plan has long been in place to create a false flag alien invasion. This is a leaked document from 1967. It concludes that war, or a credible substitute for war, is necessary if governments are to maintain power. In other words, the need to continually create ongoing enemies through false flag events to perpetuate war on this planet. This leak upset President Lyndon Johnson, who suppressed it. And this document is from a report from Iron Man Mountain. It's called Report from Iron Man Mountain. On page 51, and I quote, it says, "It has been hotly argued that such a menace would offer the last best hope of peace by uniting mankind against the danger of destruction by creatures from other planets or from outer space. Experiments have been proposed to test the credibility of an out-of-our-world invasion threat. It is possible that a few of the more difficult to explain, quote, flying saucers, unquote, incidents of recent years were in fact early experiments of this kind." There you go, proof positive that false flags are real. In fact, there is a famous deathbed testimony proving that false flags are real. In 1977, Werner von Braun's deathbed testimony proves that. Dr. Carol Rosen testified at the 2001 National Press Club event that before von Braun's death due to cancer, that he was shown advanced plans to create a series of false flag enemies. Some of the examples of these false flag enemies are: number one, Soviets would be the first in the series. Number two, terrorists would be used to start a false flag. Number three, rogue nations, such as North Korea and Iran. Number four, asteroids. Then he would repeat over and over again that the final card would be the extraterrestrial threat, but that it would all be a lie.
The strategy that Werner von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in '74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now, at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids, we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over, during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card, and remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens, and all of it, he said, is a lie. He didn't mention a timeline, but he said that it was going to be speeding up faster than anybody could possibly imagine. That the effort to put weapons in space was not only based on a lie, but would accelerate past the point of people even understanding it until it was already up there and too late.
That was, of course, Carol Rosen herself talking about Wernher von Braun's deathbed testimony on false flag strategy events. So I'd like to talk a little bit how the media has shaped our opinions, and how even when Dr. Greer had his National Press Club event and exposed so much dirty laundry, how Dr. Greer exposed the black budget projects that are secretly reverse engineering UAPs, the media turned it all around and made it more acceptable or more mainstream. Yeah, so back in 2001, going back to Dr. Stephen Greer's National Press Club event in Washington, D.C., he exposed a lot of illegal secret government operations, and the mainstream media did what's called a limited hangout and turned it around so that the main message wasn't about the government's dirty laundry and how they're handling the UAP phenomenon, but they just wanted to give the public the sense that Dr. Greer was letting us know that we are not alone. It pushed the "we are not alone" narrative, giving the public the impression the congressional hearing was just seeking to only reveal the reality of UFOs. And the media, in this sense, and many times what they do is they sanitize the testimony of whistleblowers so that we really don't know what they're trying to tell us. So now the media's message has evolved from "we are not alone" to the 2017 mainstream media blitz, where they want us to know that UAPs are a threat. And this all came about through Luis Elizondo's expose and his testimony back in 2017. Yeah, the media really pushed the alien threat narrative and supported it. I'd like to talk a little bit now about another narrative that's been floating around the UFO community, and that's the narrative that all NHI are benevolent and mean us no harm. The Vatican is a big supporter of the idea that NHI or all NHI are benevolent. In the year 2000, Monsignor Balducci, a theologian of the Vatican, said, quote, "Lower than humanity, there cannot be anything in this universe. You know, God cannot be so foolish as to entrust all of his hopes for intelligent beings just on this planet." End quote. There was also a 2008 interview with Jesuit Gabriel Funes, who stated that extraterrestrial life is likely to be more ethically evolved than humans and may not have experienced a fall and may be free from original sin. How about that? To remain in full friendship with their creator, making it possible to regard them as our brothers. And another big supporter of the narrative that all NHI or aliens are benevolent and do not mean us any harm is, of course, Dr. Stephen Greer. He has stated that he believes all ET races are benevolent. His rationale is that any race that has obtained interstellar travel would have evolved spiritually to be benevolent and peaceful. He cites the fact that if there was malevolent ET races, that with their advanced technology, they could wipe out Earth without a fight. He says that the witnesses which claim encounters with malevolent ET races have been subjected to false implanted memories whose purpose is to justify a future planned alien false flag attack. And as much as I support Dr. Greer and appreciate everything he's done probably the most as far as getting transparency out of the government, I disagree with him there. I think that the saying goes, as above, so below. I think that there's a variety probably of NHI. They do exist, and some are good and some may be bad. They're just like us. And of course, the opposite of the narrative in the UFO community that all NHI aliens are good is the opposite point of view, or the narrative that aliens or NHI are evil. And religious leaders sometimes go as far as saying that they're demonic. Evangelist minister Pat Robertson stated that, quote, space aliens, those beings and UFOs, are really demonic intelligences, fallen angels. Aliens will reveal themselves as demonic entities that delight in doing Satan's work. The planet will be torment and turmoil until Jesus returns to deal the final blow to the minions of evil, end quote. And apparently the CIA has been accused of influencing the church in that narrative. In 1996, July the 17th, a select committee on intelligence had a hearing on the CIA's use of journalists and clergy in intelligence operations. It is to be noted that not only is the CIA utilizing journalists in the mainstream media, but they have also utilized the clergy in the church in order to promote the CIA's agenda. And if you guys have a visual on this, I have the document here that proves that the CIA uses journalists and clergy in intelligence operations, which happens to be the title of the document. So in summary, going back to the 20th century reveals that anti-gravity craft possibly were retrieved. There have been psychological efforts or operations to keep the public from believing that there's anything to the UAP phenomenon. And supposedly, there's been a suppression of this anti-gravitic technology and space programs from both ourselves and possibly the Nazis since World War II. AARO and the Department of Defense claim that even if we do have NHI craft or UAPs, that we have been unsuccessful in reverse engineering them. And it seems that there was a plan in place called a false flag to depict NHI as a threat in order to unite us and make them a common enemy. Both the Vatican and Dr. Stephen Greer, as much as I respect him, they both believe that all NHI across the board are good and mean us no harm. Some church members believe that NHI should be viewed as demonic and are a threat. But the fact of the matter seems that since the 1950s, we've possibly developed anti-gravitic technology and craft. And we might possibly already have a space program called Solar Warden. But without truthful and full disclosure, what we're left with is catastrophic disclosure, something that comes from a grassroots effort, which is why I'm doing this and why I believe that we should all maintain a certain interest, even though the media might try and distract us from the truth. Through catastrophic disclosure, the NHI might possibly just decide to reveal themselves and not go through governments. This would then be followed by everyone realizing that these black budget programs have been deceiving us and have been keeping the truth from us. Now is the time for full truth and for the government to come clean. Without these illegal black budget programs being able to hide themselves, the whole hoax or lie would be revealed. Revealing the truth would dismantle their control structure, this control of our media, and therefore what we're exposed to and our thoughts on what the NHI and the UAP phenomenon might be. This would all go away if the truth came out. The public would no longer be psychologically manipulated. This would unite the world, because then we would realize how we've been lied to and deceived. And the world as a whole hopefully would vow never to let this happen again. This would finally allow us to evolve peacefully and move forward as a whole. Before I end, I would like to show some video footage of actual UAPs, or what I believe are UAPs, so that you guys can check this out. It's some of my favorite footage. That was obviously Lockheed Martin's TR-3B. This is a photo of a UFO taken in 1953 Korea. On an unrevealed date in 1953, a United States Marine Air Group photographer snapped this official U.S. Navy photograph that got information with aircraft in the Korean Air Combat Zone. For a few seconds, the UFO closely paced the Marine aircraft, then flew off at a speed estimated at over 1,000 miles per hour and disappeared in the distance. A bright flash from the cupola on top of the disc-shaped object burnt into the film emulsion during the short exposure. And this is a UAP shot down recently in the Ukraine.
Дайте мои, смотрите, какую я скульптуру нашла.
And this was from YouTube, and it's posted from @Luis Andres Jasper Enrevija 6649. And this was posted by Richard Boyland. It's a photo of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works UFO factory at Helendale, California. That's where they make them. And this is the type of craft that Lockheed Martin Skunk Works is making, because they actually posted this. And this is a Bosnian UFO. This was taken in Bosnia. That was a Bosnian UFO from 2009 at 2 different angles and speeds. This was filmed in Italy, and it made their news broadcast.
Risale al 2003 e secondo gli ufologi è stato girato da un ignoto videoamatore in Val Provincia di Pordenone e recapitato, sempre in forma anonima, ad Antonio Chiumiento, esperto di porcia. Prima di essere divulgato è stato analizzato da ingegneri e esperti di montaggio video. Il loro parere finale è che non si tratta di una sovrapposizione elettronica di immagini. La sequenza filmata, girata di giorno, senza rumori di fondo, è indubbiamente molto suggestiva. Il disco, che ricorda molto quelli visti nelle serie televisive degli anni 70-80, sta a una probabile altezza di 7-8 metri, sembra esplorare la zona, poi scompare nel cielo a una velocità che è stata stimata in 20.000 km orari.
Yeah, he's saying there that it went in excess of 20,000 miles per hour. Here's the sequence without the... I'm showing this because it's a really clear close-up view of a UAP. Here's a cigar-shaped UAP. I believe these smaller disc-shaped UAPs go into a cigar-shaped UAP, and that's the cigar-shaped UAP. Yeah, so they go in through the back, it seems. Wow. Okay. And that was taken from Reddit, and it was posted by u/Varen Seeker. This post on Reddit was by Vicky Verma at Unexplained 2020. And he's saying that it's the greatest UFO photos taken of giant cigar mothership over New York in 1967, way before CGI. It was seen ejecting small saucers seen in photo 4. These are real images taken by Josephine Ferrer. This was also posted by Vicky Verma on X at Unexplained 2020. In 2020, Luis Elizondo stated that Pentagon has a clear image of a mysterious triangle emerging from the ocean, and this was recorded by military pilots. He said, "I mean, you can see the skin of the aircraft." And this is one of my favorite shots right here with Luis Elizondo reacting just to the left. Here's David Grush with one of his earlier interviews telling what we have.
So you've spoken to people with direct knowledge
Yes,
of a secret legacy UFO program.
correct.
You're saying that the United States government has retrieved alien technology.
Yes, the assessment was non-human, presumably extraterrestrial, but we do have retrieved non-human material and craft that we have in our possession.
Do we have alien bodies?
We do.
I don't think that he could be more explicit that we do have retrieved craft and that we do have alien bodies. David Grush believes that we should make the UAP issue an election issue this year.
I want to help the current administration. If not, we need to make it an election issue.
The Daily Mail, 5th, 2004, had an exclusive, and they said that the CIA secret office has conducted UFO retrieval missions on at least 9 crash sites around the world, whistleblowers reveal. And this was from the Daily Mail on Monday, March the 25th, 2024. Here's Russ Colhart exposing how the CIA has been in charge of retrieving crashed UAPs?
Firstly, g'day, Connell. The Office of Global Access is the office, I'm told, where this is all happening. You've got to have an office to coordinate the retrieval of these craft, and I know a lot of people out there still think this is all science fiction, but since we did the Grush interview a few months ago, I've just got more solid with intelligence sources who are telling me that the entire operation is and has long been run out of the CIA, and the OGA, the Office of Global Access, is where it's happening. The only issue that I take issue with in the Daily Mail report is that it's not just 9 craft. I'm told that the United States is in possession of far more than 9 craft, not all of them intact. And whilst this might all sound incredible, what I can also reveal is that, yes, there are JSOC operators, Special Operations Command operators, mainly recruited from the US Air Force Special Forces, who are involved in these retrieval teams. And it's a very active and ongoing operation.
So there you have it. Russ Colhart exposed that the CIA has been in charge of crash retrieval of UAPs. But why is it kept secret?
The law requires the U.S. government to tell the public what it knows about the countless unidentified flying objects that have been spotted in the skies above Earth over the past 3,000 years. It's designed to be, and it very well could be, a transformative piece of legislation. And it comes at a time when we can finally say with confidence that the most unlikely sounding theories about UFOs are actually true. Yes, these things are real. They're not all weather balloons. They're not experimental aircraft from this or any other country. Whatever they are not of human origin, nor do they behave according to the laws of known physics. And yes, the US government currently has physical evidence that they exist. That means wreckage of the craft as well as the bodies of the beings that flew them. Amazingly, all of this is true. We know that from the detailed testimony, much of it under oath, from several high-level whistleblowers, including longtime intel officers Lou Elizondo and Dave Grush, both of whom we've talked to. But there have been many, about 10 so far. So the question is, now that the UAP Disclosure Act has passed, when can the rest of us see the information that we paid for and in fact own? Well, not so fast, it turns out. One of the great secrets of Washington, known to everyone inside Washington, is that many of the most powerful members of Congress do not work for their constituents, much less for the rest of us, for the country at large. They are instead puppets of the most secretive federal agencies. They are controlled effectively by the permanent bureaucracy, including through bribery and blackmail. Americans have been hurt in the process. But why? What's the point of this? Wouldn't it be a lot easier just to release the facts? Now, the conventional explanation for why they haven't been released is that the US government is lying about UFOs because the truth about UFOs is too scary to reveal, that they're real, and our leaders wouldn't want to panic the population. But that's not true. In fact, it's ridiculous. Wouldn't want to terrify the population? Terrifying the population is what our government does best and most avidly. Officials regularly gin up irrational fears about COVID or white supremacy or Vladimir Putin or a dozen other topics as part of a pretty obvious control strategy. It's not like these people mind it scaring you. They want to scare you, and they do it every day. So why would they lie about UFOs? Well, because they're covering up a crime, obviously, and it's their crime. Someday we'll discover what that crime is. But in the meantime, here are a few questions that honest lawmakers ought to be asking. Have government agencies used tax dollars to procure advanced non-human technology? If they have, where exactly is that technology now? Has it been used for profit? How exactly has the American public benefited from that technology? And then this question, the most pressing of all. Has the US government communicated directly with the beings that piloted these craft? Have American officials ever entered into any sort of agreement with them? And if so, what are the terms of that agreement? These are not random questions. They are informed questions. And at this point, Americans have a moral right to know the answers.
So I know that was a lot, but I hope you guys enjoyed my overview of UAP events over history. I just wanted to clarify a few things, give different points of views, because very little is known concretely. I'm Al Barrows. This has been UFO Disclosure. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I'm sending out all my love and good intentions to all. Please remember to manifest a shield of protection for all the children in Gaza and the Ukraine. They're lonely and afraid. Thank you. Thank you all for listening to my podcast. Please keep seeking the truth. And if any of you are willing to pursue your representatives and push for further transparency with the government, go to the newparadigmprojects.org. It's an institute led by a constitutional lawyer called Daniel Sheehan. And it's pretty easy. All you do is click a couple of icons. You send a message right to your representative, federal and local. Thanks again.